Today's guest has helped more business owners escape burnout than most of us have had hot dinners. Jeremy Shapiro is a seasoned serial entrepreneur and the author of Your Business Growth Playbook. He's spent over 2 decades helping founders break through plateaus, simplifying what's working, and actually build businesses that don't depend on them for survival. In this episode, we get into the real stuff: how to scale without spinning out, what to do when your business becomes the bottleneck, and why working on the business isn't just a cliche, but a necessity. We also talk about systems, sabbaticals, and the difference between running a business and building one that runs without you. This is one for any founder who's hit that uncomfortable middle stage, beyond hustle but not yet free. Let's dive right in. Today, I'm joined by Jeremy Shapiro. Jeremy works with a whole range of businesses. I guess, Jeremy, rather than me give you a really poor intro, why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and your background?
Sure. My name is Jeremy Shapiro, and I've been a serial entrepreneur now for about 30 years. All of my businesses over my entire career have all been in the service of other business owners and entrepreneurs, helping them to build their businesses, grow, scale, and move towards what I call entrepreneurial freedom.
Listen, so give me a bit of a backstory of what some of those businesses have been then.
Yeah. So, I've been involved in a range of businesses and tried a number of different business models. So early on, I had a services business doing like IT consulting work. I've had subscription businesses with recurring revenue. That is something I've learned to look for in almost all my business models. I love recurring revenue based businesses. Because I've had businesses where it's, small client base, but, high dollar amount per client. And those are also wonderful in a different way. But if nothing else, even the diversification of the continuity based businesses in the background is great, right? It smooths the months and the quarters out. And it's something I don't want to say you don't have to think about, but it's almost on autopilot. There's predictable revenue and cash flow coming in. So that's something that I think is great for any business to have at least some of the revenue as a recurring.
Yeah, I would 100% agree with you. I don't know how retailers, for example, do that. That must be a very high stakes, very high stress situation managing that type of organization.
It is, right? Like not just retail, but you think restaurants and other businesses where they're going out and looking for that next transaction constantly. But many of those businesses that even we consider traditional have started to find ways to incorporate, as ridiculous as it might seem, membership models that work really well. But we've seen, if nothing else, businesses have loyalty programs, right? And that's a strategy I love helping businesses put in place to, if nothing else, encourage your customers to come back. But when it's a paid membership program, that is brilliant. We've seen movie theaters adopt this over the years fantastically, with success. We've seen amusement parks do this, places offering season passes, restaurants. We have a restaurant chain near here. It's like a supper club, right? So you can go in there and just buy a one-off meal if you want, but it's a little pricey. Or you join their supper club program and you get like a preferred rate. And you got to imagine, once you're a member at a restaurant nearby where you work, why would you go somewhere else when you're already bought into the program? So yeah, the continuity piece is phenomenal and it really can fit into many businesses.
Yeah, absolutely. So what's the sweet spot for you? What sort of business do you typically work with?
Yeah. So the business owners I work with, by the time they find me, are established, right? They've built a business. They've got a product, a service. They know how to sell it, but the growth they were seeing has disappeared and they're feeling stuck or plateaued. And so sometimes it's a solopreneur who started to build out a team, or it's an established business owner with a 7-figure business, but the commonality is whatever got them to where they are now isn't getting them to that next level. And they want to break through and get back to that exciting, fun growth we all love as business owners. And so that's really where my expertise is working with these businesses to not only help with the mindset shifts, but the operational and the product and marketing side to get them back to growth and take care of those really important, key performance indicators that are probably missing the mark from where the business owner wants them to be.
I guess across any sector or specific sectors or anything.
Yeah. So really across industries, right? I actually love what I call the cross-pollination of ideas, where we take a best practice that's commonplace in one industry and we help another, a business outside that industry implement that. And that really provides that pivot. Because look, we can all go to trade shows and conventions and meet people just like us with businesses just like ours with the same challenge, right? But the pivots and the true differentiation comes from transplanting an idea from one place into your industry. And so, like, just a quick example for you. I was sitting across the table from two different business owners I was working with. One had a traditional brick and mortar retail store, right? And the other had a fully online e-commerce business. Now, both these business owners were successful. They both had sales channels that brought in customers to their business. However, they're both also feeling plateaued. Now, here's what's interesting. The e-commerce store owner built up an email list, as one does in the online world. Every day would send out emails and knew when he hit send on an email, money would come in the door. And he would track earnings per click, would look at how much money came in based on list size, and every single day would send an email and money came in. Now, for the retail store owner, that was a pretty foreign concept. They were used to people coming in the store, making a one-time purchase, maybe coming back again, but they weren't collecting email addresses or contact info for people physically in the store. So we had a really good conversation, and that retail store owner was able to understand what platform to use for email follow-up, understood the idea that it was okay to send out email, how not to be a nuisance, but to be a welcome guest in someone's email inbox, what kind of promotions work well, and really got the best practices from this person who'd been doing it. And so we were able to facilitate that conversation. So over the course of the next month, she actually implemented this whole email marketing piece to the business. And wouldn't you know, was getting repeat customers coming back in the store who otherwise might not have come back in. She suddenly was looking at metrics in her business like earnings per click and what the open rates were and what the click-throughs and how much money came in each time she sent an email. And it was a whole new source of revenue she never had. Now, conversely, this e-commerce store owner who was seeing success was asking that retail store owner about a strategy she was using. So she was using something very traditional and commonplace in her industry, which is direct mail, right? The post, sending out letters and postcards in the mail to prospects and customers and so on. Now, the e-commerce store owner was used to this online world, the idea of working with a print fulfillment house and buying a list and looking at your customer profile. And all of that was a totally new world. So again, with this really great conversation, found out all the resources for how to profile your customer list, which is a strategy we love to do. Where to buy a list, what company to work with to send out direct mail, what kind of mail to send out, what kind of offers to make, and on and on and on. And wouldn't you know, over the course of the next month, that e-commerce store owner was sending out direct mail and was suddenly talking about the metrics and the new business and the whole new sales channel of customers they would have reached otherwise without implementing that best practice. So these are those kinds of things that happen when we have this cross-pollination. And that's why I love working with a diverse range of businesses, right? The commonality is it's a business owner who's scaled and gotten stuck, right? And now wants to get back to growth. But the industry is wide.
The bit that I find really interesting about that is those were actually relatively, I don't want to say similar businesses, but, you know, both commerce businesses. Actually, you could have had a completely different business also take learnings from that is nothing to do with selling even a physical product or shipping something, which I think is the real key here.
You know, in business, we're so often told to differentiate, right? And we must differentiate. We want to stand out from the competition and be unique in a buyer's mind. And that mentality, however, can go too far, where if you think your business is unique and you have a snowflake business and nobody else has a business like yours, that's where many business owners are mistaken, right? Your brand and how you show up to your prospects and the product and offerings you have, yes, that should be unique. But the actual art of business behind the scenes, the financials are the financials of the financials. Right? We can look at the financials of most any business and look at them in more or less the same way, right? The fundamentals, the systems, the hiring, the processes, the scaling, right? All these strategies we use. Yes, you have a unique business, but a lot of the same playbook applies to your business as well.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I guess one of the things we're going to talk about today is burnout. So you work with founders often at breaking point. How do you spot that before it's too late? And I guess that leads really well on from actually a business is often a business, and you'll be seeing founders in lots of different industries hitting burnout. But I imagine what it looks like to the person is the same, or how it presents to you and what you're spotting in them is the same.
Yeah. So it shows up in a few ways, right? One is sort of the frustration burnout of a business owner who's been doing something and it was working for them all along and now it stopped working and they don't know why, can't figure it out. And they're sort of stuck in this tunnel vision of trying to do the same thing the same way, and it just doesn't work anymore. And I felt this myself in a past business of mine, right? This was in the early days of like Google AdWords. We were running AdWords, and we found for every about dollar we spent, we get about $4 back in, right? And as any business owner now knows, you scale that up, right? So we doubled the ad spend, and it went down to each dollar we spent got about $3 back in. But that was still good, right? These are still a good ROI. And we continued to scale that up. Well, it got to the point where we're hitting about $1 out, got us about $1 in. So it was about break even on the front end. The recurring revenue made up for that. And so we're okay with it. But we got distracted by other parts of the business. And as we all know, in the world of PPC, the pay-per-click industry changes, the algorithms change, and so on. And we weren't paying attention to that part of the business. So next thing you know, now we're spending $1 and getting like 50 cents in. And our ad costs are going up, and the revenue from that lead source is going down. And we didn't know what to do differently, right? This was outside of our wheelhouse, our area of expertise. And it was frustrating hitting our head against the wall of, you don't want to turn it off because that's where you got all your customers. Yet at the same time, it's costing you money. But if you don't do that, what should you do? So it's really easy to get stuck in that sort of tunnel vision problem solving space. And in our case, we ended up bringing in a third party agency who had expertise in this. And I don't want to say overnight, but relatively quickly, they were able to both cut the ad spend by half and about double the efficiency of the campaign. So with a few smart tweaks on their end, we 4x'd, the ROI we were getting. And then they continued to manage it and run that successfully for us. So that was a win, but we were stuck and someone else was able to help us get out of that. So oftentimes when I'm working with business owners, I'll see something similar to that. What was working is no longer working or can't scale beyond that certain point. The other thing I'll see is business owners who've fallen into this trap are feeling like they've got to hustle. Right? We've heard the experts talking about how if you're not, working 27 hours a day, 8 days a week, your competition's out there taking your lunch. And while you're sleeping, your competition is innovating and they're going to take the market share that you want to go after. And like that fear-based mentality that someone's taking what's yours, right, is so unhealthy. It's toxic, right? It's going to keep you up at night in all the wrong ways. So when a business owner is stuck in this fear-based mentality of grow at all costs or someone else will do it instead, you get like the worst kind of burnout. It means you stop taking care of your physical health, your mental health, your relationships, finances, everything, because you view this all in everything or nothing mentality. And that's really a scary and dangerous place to be. So there are a few strategies we can work with folks on, but that's a really dangerous one. And the third of the three that I commonly see are business owners who, this is usually more your solopreneurs, who feel they can't scale because either what they do is so unique and special that nobody else could do it instead of them, or there's a fear around teaching someone else how to run their business because that person might run off and take the whole business. And both of those are really limiting because until you are able to intentionally step back from your business and let others do the work of the business for you, you'll forever have a glorified job along with all the risk of a business. So you almost have to intentionally put the systems and people in place to allow you to step back and get over that mental, a pre-burnout step.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what always strikes me is that smart people ignore the signs and just keep pushing until it's too late. And I think once that burnout hits, it's really hard to come back from. And certainly I've had that, it made me fall out of love with my business. I just didn't want to do it anymore. I was like, I just absolutely hate this. I just don't want to do this anymore. Like, I'm done now. But I think, it would have been great to have spotted that earlier and realized that was happening.
Now, when you look back, did you have people in your life, in your business around you who they saw the signs that were telling you? And when you look back, you're like, oh yeah, they were trying to tell me this, or was nobody else even aware of that?
My business scaled really quickly, like virtually overnight. So I think it was really exhausting that year. And I think I was getting told that it was too much. And like, actually I didn't need to do everything. And I wasn't doing everything, but like I was kind of, picking up everything that was fallen because we'd scaled so quickly, like did not have the resource. So I think, but I always thought that was a really short-term problem. And therefore, if I just pushed through a little bit, actually be fine. But I think as with everything in business, there's always something, isn't there? So, I did push through that bit, but then the next hurdle came along, which was, how do you keep the scale that you're at? So then it was like, well, I just need to keep going. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's exactly what you said before. It's like it's the one more sprint. It's well, we've just got to get this project done. And I think at that point, probably people had maybe given up trying to say to me, do you know what, it's too much. Whereas actually probably that's the time I needed to hear it, rather than at the very early stage when I was like, do you know what, this is just going to go on for a few months. I can do this. I think, when we're 18 months in, it would have been nice for certainly the business coach I was working with at the time to be going, you know what, like, this is, you're like struggling here a lot. But, I can also relate to that point around having trust in others. And I think, something you said earlier around the ad spend and you get an external agency, that's fantastic. That worked for you, but it doesn't always work. Hiring experts doesn't always work. And I've certainly had my fair share of that. So actually you feel like you're bringing someone in to relieve the burden, and actually they just create more burden.
If it's the wrong person, yeah.
If it's the wrong person,
yeah.
and I guess the thing is, you don't really know till you get the person. Like, there's so much you can do in recruitment, but it's only so much, right? Like,
there's an adage
I really don't know.
You don't know, right? And there's an adage I love, which is hire slow, fire fast, right?
100% agree with this.
You got to pull the trigger and commit to a hire. But if it's not going to be a good fit, better to deal with that sooner rather than later. Right. And this applies to vendors and such as well. I always love figuring out a definition of success, not just in business, like in life, for family vacations, for a night out with friends, for whatever, right? Know what success looks like, because then you know if you're hitting the mark or not. So if it's a vendor, right, before we onboard, if we're trying them out, we talk about like, hey, by what date are we going to make a go, no go decision? What does success look like? And if we hit that, then we keep going and we define a new goalpost.
Absolutely. And I also think we also just need to talk about how scaling can cause you to burn out. And I think, everyone thinks scaling's fantastic. We said earlier, everybody wants to be in a growing business, but actually that can really take its toll. And I think sometimes it's okay to say, do you know what? We don't need to scale anymore right now. Like, we just need to have a period of consolidation maybe. And it's back to this whole, like you said, your competitors doing 28-hour days. Oh my God. And actually, I think sometimes that mindset can just get you in this rat race that you're like, it's too much. I can't do it anymore. And actually, like, we don't have to be chasing this craziness all the time. Ultimately, if it's your business, you can do what you want with it. And it may be that you want to scale it fast and sell it, but actually it might be that you go, do you know what? I don't want to scale it really fast this year. I need a bit of time. And, if you haven't got the leadership team there to help you, you need to maybe take a step back.
It's important, again, going back to this idea of defining success, right? A lot of business owners get into business for varying reasons, but don't actually know what that North Star is or where they're going, right? And at the end of the day, one of your guests in a recent episode actually talked about exactly this, right? All businesses end up the same way, right? So your business is going to go in one of three directions, right? You're either going to pass this on to your kids, and that's rare, right? You're going to just shut the business down, which is what happens with almost all businesses, and it's sort of sad, or you end up selling the thing, right? Most business owners have never considered there's only three outcomes.
And most either way, you are going to be out of it. Yeah. Somewhere or another, you are not going to be there. And I think I remember exactly the episode you talked about, and I was like, wow, yeah, you're right. Yeah. You are always going to exit your business. Yeah. It doesn't matter what happens, you are going to exit.
Will it be on your terms? That's the question.
Exactly. Will it be on your terms? And I think, I could certainly relate to that, because when I had the business, I was like, well, I'm going to do this forever. Why would I do it? I remember recruiting someone in the middle of COVID, and he's like, in 10 years' time, are you still going to be doing this? And I was like, I'm still going to be doing this? Like, what else will I be doing? I don't know what else I'd do.
Most folks haven't thought beyond that. So, but when we step back and look at what that definition of success is, right, and what we're building and why, it can answer a lot of questions, right? Are you looking to build the next decacorn, the $10 billion exit company? That's very different than building up a business that's going to provide a certain dollar amount of passive income to you. And that's also vastly different than looking to scale a business steadily over the years, or to provide a certain number of jobs, or, to have a certain dollar figure exit, right? If we figure out what it is we want, we can build towards that. Otherwise, we're in a hamster wheel of looking at our to-do list of today to build a business with no real bigger picture in mind.
Do you ever think that people sometimes are a bit embarrassed by seeing what they want?
Yeah. Well, I think there's two
Because
pieces.
I think
So one,
money is a bit of a funny comment, isn't it?
But it's spot on, because sometimes there is an element of like embarrassment around what you might want to build, right? Especially if you look at who your social circles are. The people you hang out with a lot. Yes, there might be some business owners and entrepreneurs if you've curated those circles, but it's generally folks who have a 9-to-5 job. It's generally folks on the standard traditional path of, university, job, career. And so to talk to them about something outside of that, can be the
They
fear
don't
of
get
being
it.
pulled
They're
back
just
down.
they just don't get it, do they? I've had this with friends. They just go, oh, well, like what you have now is fine. And you're like, okay, right. Okay.
Or they think you're crazy, right?
Or
They think it's ridiculous that
Or they think that
you have
you
what you're
both at
building,
the same time.
Yeah, often at the same time. So like you usually can't talk about this with most folks. You can talk about it with other business owners, but even there, right? The stratification of businesses, right? We were talking earlier in this conversation about hearing what you need to hear, but then actually like really hearing it are two different things, right? So when you have like a solopreneur who's hearing from a business owner that has a good sized team of management, talking to a business owner with teams and a C-level suite of executives, right? The challenges they're all facing are not only vastly different. Between those tiers is often an inability to understand the challenges others are facing, right? I was running facilitating a group, and we had solopreneurs. We also had business owners with teams, and we had one guy with 130 employees. He had multiple locations. He had executives across the board for different things. And so we were talking about a marketing strategy, right? And for that business owner in the middle. And the guy with the big business was like, well, yeah, that's great, but like I got a marketing guy. He deals with all of that, right? His challenge is he was talking about some HR issues he was dealing with that the solopreneur couldn't relate to at all and couldn't learn a whole lot from because it wasn't applicable at the stage he was at, right? So even when you hear advice and direction of things to watch out for, if that's not where you're at, that's way down the road and it's a problem for a different day.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I'm sure, you can relate to this and our listeners as well. We've all had the experience where like we read a book, right? Like a business book. And then like years later, we go back and we read it again. We're wondering like, hey, who came in the middle of the night and like snuck that chapter into the book because it wasn't there last time. And like, no, it's the same book from your shelf. It's just, it had advice or a story that meant nothing to you at the time that now it has resonance and it makes sense. And I think a lot of this comes down to like this lattice work that when we acquire knowledge, if we don't have something to apply it to at that moment, it doesn't stick. When it's the problem in front of us that we're facing right now and today, it's night and day. It means the difference. And it's exactly what we need to hear, which is why rereading books and going to courses and conferences and continuing to sharpen that sword and be around others on that same path is so powerful. That's what gives us the repeated exposure. So we're able to take out that piece that applies to us right now when we need it.
Yeah, 100% agree with you. And I think the other thing I would just say on that is, actually, I think from day to day, people can vary in what they need to hear. Do you know what I mean? Like, depending on their mood, sometimes it's not the time to be given the piece of advice that they may need right now, but they're just not receptive that day because they've got too many other things going on, or, they're busy whack-a-mole and the latest crisis out the way.
Firefighting.
And it's like, yeah, firefighting, which, can be a lot of business, certainly, and could certainly lead to burnout, which we were just talking about.
Firefighting absolutely does lead to burnout because you get no forward motion. All you're doing is being reactive. You never get to work on the important things. It's funny because I think a strategy that once implemented correctly is really powerful is time boxing. Right? We've probably all heard about this before, but when you block a time in your calendar to get something done. So for example, when you have a board meeting, you're not going to miss the board meeting because there's something else you're dealing with. It's on the calendar. Other people are counting on you and you said you'd be there. So you show up and you get done the business of the board meeting, right? So in the same way, if we apply that same strategy of block the time on our calendar, not even more than 90 minutes. It's a small block, right? But there's a certain bigger picture task that the business needs longer term that you can get done. It's powerful. And ideally, you're able to implement this and take a day to focus on the bigger picture business stuff and know your definition of success for that day or for that time block of what you want to get done. You can walk out with your strategic plan. You can walk out for the plan for your next product launch. You can walk out with your plan for the business pivot. You can walk out for the plan for growth, right? You can create the strategy you need to then go execute. And that's not something you can do in, little 1-minute chunks between emails and people walking into your office and dealing with fires of the day. You need to intentionally block that time out to do what matters most for the business longer term.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to guard that time as well, because I think quite often it depends on the culture you have in the business, and certainly lots of businesses want an open door culture, but it's really important that staff don't expect instantaneous answers because they look on your calendar and what you have in is not an external meeting or an internal meeting, because you wouldn't dream of going and bringing someone out for a meeting unless there was an absolute crisis happening. But you see something in their calendar that's just their time blocked out, and I think a lot of people would go, okay, right, well, I can speak to them now. I don't need to wait.
It's funny. So others can view it that way, but I find almost more often business owners themselves don't respect their own time block. They see it on the calendar, but there's a fire. So they go deal with that instead of the important stuff, right? Whereas if that was a meeting with someone else at a different location, you wouldn't blow them off, right? Because you committed to that. You said you'd be there. So this is why sometimes for time boxing, it's helpful to have a different location or have an accountability buddy who you go meet up with. And you say, we're going to meet at this time. We don't even need to talk. But that still comes down to strategy of time boxing being the powerful, fuel for growth, because it's always working on the business instead of working in the business.
Yeah, 100%. Just moving on to scaling then, how do you help founders avoid absolute chaos while they're scaling? Because it's really easy, isn't it? You start to get traction, and especially if that scaling is unplanned or is a lot bigger than is planned. What's your advice for founders in that situation?
Yeah, so it's funny. Scaling comes from, one of two things, right? More commonly, it comes from scale we're seeking and we're out there actively, building the business on our own or with a small team, right? And then there's the much rarer, more accidental growth. And I think this is the kind of growth that you and I have talked about experiencing, where almost overnight, there's explosive growth that you didn't plan for and the operations weren't ready for, right? So the former is far more common, right? We are stacking the bricks and building up the business. And that's good. And so you're almost in this two-sided marketplace of you do the marketing and the sales to build the business, and then you grow the operations, and then you grow the customer base, and then grow the operations, sort of, lockstep to each other, right? That is a far more sustainable growth that we set out to intentionally create, right? The accidental overnight I've experienced in businesses myself, you have as well, and I've had many clients who do as well. And that's where you almost do go into a reactive operationalization of the business of, oh my gosh, we've got to hire not just the people, but we've got to create the systems, and we need to do this quickly, not just for the business that we're building today, but for the business we're going to have tomorrow. One of my earlier businesses, there were years where we had constant media, right? Newspaper, radio, television, online was covering us almost daily. And that was wonderful. And some of it was smaller media and all, but we had one news piece hit, which oh my gosh, overnight, the customer growth that was coming in from it was huge. We had a few dozen prospective business owners reach out and ask how they could license our business model for where they were, how they could franchise what we have. Could they buy the business? Could they do what we're doing? Which that is a really good problem to have. And in our naive place where we viewed that and said, no, we're going to be in your market soon. We got this, and did not take on that leverage growth we could have. And in retrospect, that was a big mistake we made, right? We had people willing to be the boots on the ground to run this in other areas and pay us for that. Had we been more ready, we absolutely could have capitalized on that, but we missed that window, right? So knowing what that business model looks like for the unexpected growth is good. And so when you're talking about that conversation you had with someone asking, hey, 10 years from now, where will you be? What will you be doing? If you know what your business could look like 10 or 100x bigger, you don't need to go buy the facilities for it and onboard the vendors and do all these really expensive things for a business you don't yet have. But having the idea of what the org chart might look like is powerful. And that's exactly an exercise we often do with business owners. Let's create the org chart for your business you have today. Even though you probably don't have a formal org chart, it's good to structure out what the different roles are, not the people, the roles in the business. And especially for a smaller business, you're going to have someone's name in multiple different roles within your org chart. And that's okay. And as a real small business, it's probably your name in all these boxes in your org chart. And that's okay, right? That gives us our baseline for where we are now. We then future pace and we look at what is the org chart for the business that we want to be, that we're going to grow into? What are those different roles in the company? We don't need to put names in that box right now, but we know what that structure looks like. We also now know where we are and where we want to go, and that can help us to create the systems to operationalize what we have. And we also know how those systems will grow over time and what new roles will get created as we get there. So if you have the planned growth, you fill this in as you go. When you have the unexpected growth, you at least know what you're building towards and what vendors you might work with that you've already talked about having onboarded with, and you're able to get that scale into place.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other thing to say is when you're scaling that fast, that you may feel like you've put a process in place for whatever the situation is, but actually you need to constantly reassess that, because just because you felt like you put that process in place could only be a matter of months ago. If you're growing that quickly, that process may be out of date already. And I think that's something that's quite difficult when you feel like you're firefighting in that growth spurt, because you just think, well, I just did that. I just did that task, right? I just dealt with that team. I got that process sorted. Yeah, but the business is different again already. So actually that process doesn't work already.
There's a philosophy I love, which is this philosophy of Kaizen. And this idea behind Kaizen is continuous, never ending improvement, right? And so when we create systems, the systems aren't set in stone and done. Systems are always open to modification. In fact, on our systems, we put down like not just the date it was created, but the date the system was last reviewed and the date the system was last updated. Because as we grow, we might find that a system can be reviewed and it still works within the business, how we do something. Others, we realize that we've changed, we've varied, or it's subject to improvement, and we go ahead and modify what that system is. Especially as our teams grow, you might have a generalist who does 12 parts of a system, but as you grow, you might move to specialists, and a work order or a customer moves between team members. And these are all okay things, but we want to have that operational, right? That way we know what it looks like and we update the system as we go.
Yeah. 100%. And I think you're right. Like a few organizations I'm in, we have what's called a flywheel, where we're constantly working around like this wheel. Do you know what I mean? It's exactly the same as what you just discussed. And what do you think is the best way of preparing for that future complexity without getting too carried away right now? Because I guess you could get stuck in the blue sky thinking and lose track of reality and what your current challenges are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So knowing like that org chart of what things will look like for a much larger company is good. Pre-vetting some vendors that you might need for when you get there is good, right? So for example, going and leasing the larger warehouse space might not make sense for an e-commerce business you don't have, right? But having an idea of what you might need and what some good options might be is a good exercise, right? Knowing who your vendors might be that can supply the data center you need, right? And what that architecture might look like is good to know and have in your back pocket before you've signed contracts to take on services you don't yet need and so on. So you do some of the prep work and some of the research to look into what you can turn on when you need it, so that when the time comes, you're not in the blue sky research phase. You've done that blue sky brainstorming. You've done some of the vetting, and now it's a matter of working with those vendors. From a human standpoint, from like your actual team, I love for businesses to have a careers page on their website with the job postings of today and tomorrow, right? And have what we call a hiring bench, right? So when you need a role, you don't then go create the job description and go out there and start from scratch. You ideally have the job posting passively online. And this does a few interesting things, by the way, right? One, it shows your prospective customers that you are a growing, scaling business, that you're hiring for roles. Two, it lets prospective ideal team members see what those roles are and seek you out and look for the hire. And even if it's a role you don't actually need to fill right now, it lets you have a bench of prospective candidates, right? This is especially good for roles where you have a lot of people doing the role. You might need 10 widget assemblers, right? Or 10 account managers, or whatever the number is of a role you have. And you don't need any more right now. But if you're always hiring, always interviewing for that role, when it's time to scale up, you have a deep bench, like on a sports team, of people you can pull from. And look, if you find a stellar rock star candidate and you're like, I have to have him on the team, even in a different role, you'll make space for them on the team, right? And sometimes we find not someone who can operate a system, but someone who's just going to be a phenomenal team member. You'll find a role for them. And that's a good problem to have, because now you have a bench of candidates and a bench of talent, and you're not in crisis going out and looking for people.
And so a lot of that sounds like it comes in the mindset shift from being solopreneur to CEO, because you're always thinking future, and you're given this, perception that you're growing, even if you're not growing, but your aspirations are to grow. What other things do you think mindset shift wise are really essential for that transition?
Yeah. So, it's funny. We're talking earlier in the conversation about like the advice you hear, but you're not ready for, right? Oftentimes I'll talk with business owners about some of the mindset shifts that are needed or that next step growth, and they don't feel ready for it. So that conversation happens a number of times, and then the switch flips and they're like, oh, I created this system and I hired a person. And we're like, yes, we've been talking for 6 months about that, right? They could have used it then, but finally, at least it's happening now. And that often comes down to this mindset shift, right? So 2 things I commonly see there that block that. One is that perfectionist mentality, right? Especially for a smaller business where you as the owner are the one providing the service. There's this idea that no one else can do it as well as you can, and that the bar for service is so high. Well, when we set that definition of success and what that looks like, then we can hire someone. And if they're able to meet that same definition of success, then you know that someone else can do it as well as you. But what I commonly find is when a system is created and someone else runs that system for you, it's going to go in one of 3 directions, right? One's the happy path, right? That's what we just talked about. Someone else runs your system, they get a result you're happy with, everyone wins. That's our ideal where we want to go. Earlier on, though, you'll find it goes 2 other directions, right? One is that you miss the mark and you get a different outcome than what you wanted. And when you do your postmortem and look at it, it comes down that your system wasn't clear enough, right? The person who read the system and followed it just, thought it meant something else. And so your system needs revision, right? Or something you took for granted, you assumed they would do and they didn't do it that way. All right. So you revise your system. Kaizen, we revise the system, always improving. Now the person runs the system and gets the result you want. That's that happy path we're looking for. The third outcome is that the person runs the system and doesn't get the outcome, not because the system was wrong, but because you find out they just didn't follow it. And that's where we need training, coaching, and so on to bring that person back up to using the system correctly. And that gets them back in the happy path, or they're just the wrong person for the job if they're not going to follow the system. Right? So, but the first thing we need to recognize is that it is possible for others to do things as well as we can if we just establish the definition for success and the guide on how to get there. So we often start out with a documentation of let's actually create the system. Let's have you as the business owner who's providing the service, use your own system and revise it. Now let's have someone else try and do it as well. And so we're able to get over that shift of the perfectionist mentality and the idea that no one else can do it as well as you. The second mental shift we need to help folks out with is this, there's sometimes this fear-based mentality that if you show someone else how to run the system for your business, they'll just go start up the competition across the street. Can that happen? Does that happen? Yes, but it's really rare. The mentality we have as business owners and entrepreneurs is unusual. Most folks are looking for the stability of a job. They want the 9 to 5. They want the paycheck, and they want to be able to go home at night and not worry about the business. They don't want to sign up for having a business and take on the risk like you and I do, right? For the rare folk, the rare person who goes out there and opens up a competing business across the street, that is so rare. But they quickly find that running a business is much harder than having a job. And those businesses that are copycat businesses rarely ever last, right? So it's okay for someone to take on a piece of your business and run that. Remember, you're training them on a piece of the business that they're going to have operationalized and run well. It is not all the work you do on the business to stay competitive and to stay innovative. That's not the work they're doing day in, day out.
Yeah, completely agree with you. What would you say is like one lever from maybe your book that helps people get results quickly?
Yeah. So in your business growth playbook, I talk about this formula we have for growth. There's really 3 variables we can play with within the business that if we adjust any one of those levers is like turning a dial in the business and getting a little bit more. And what I love about these is in the formula, these are multiplicative, right? Not additive. So what that means is when we improve one of these variables 10% and another 10% and the other 10%, right? We don't add those together. They actually build on each other. That's because it's multiplicative, right? So what's one of these levers we can play with in the business? So we talked early in the conversation about continuity in our business, right? If we can increase the frequency with which a customer does business with us, that's already a customer we've paid to acquire, right? In continuity-based businesses, we talk about a customer acquisition cost, your CAC or your CAC. That is a dollar amount we've paid to get a new customer. Once they're in the fold of doing business with us, it costs far less to have them come back and do business with us again. We've got dozens of strategies and ways you can have customers transact with you one more time. But just one of those is that piece we talked about earlier, which is continuity, right? And for businesses that don't have continuity or think, I can't do that in my business, you'd be surprised at the business models that can. We've worked with doctors and physicians who typically only ever see a customer when there's a problem. Well, what if we shift and we put in place a continuity-based program where customers are paying for that VIP access to their doctor, knowing they can get priority scheduling, knowing that they can get proactive health and medical advice ongoing, and have access to a doctor like most of us don't usually have. Now, let's say you do have continuity in your business. Now, one of the big numbers that most businesses don't look at, but we should, is churn. This is a measure of when you lose a recurring revenue customer. So let's say in your business, you know that a customer stays with you, on average 38 months. Well, what if we can change that number? What if we put some of the strategies from your business growth playbook in place and we're able to increase that, right? If you have someone who stays with you on average 7 months and we make that 9 months, that's a lot more revenue coming in. That does not involve finding new customers, does not involve selling anything new, just comes down to strategies to help your customers happily stay with you longer, right? That reduces your churn, increases your customer lifetime value, increases your cash flow. It's all the right changes in your business. And it's a scalable thing we do again and again in your business. And that all comes down to that one variable we're talking about, which is the frequency of transactions and how often a customer transacts with you.
Yeah, completely agree. And I do think, customer lifetime value is, I feel like being from a tech background, it's mentioned quite a lot in tech, but I think you're right, it should be mentioned in a lot more industries because actually it's the most important thing. The cost of acquiring a customer is expensive. And that churn rate as well. I was actually speaking to a friend recently that became a salesperson in a gym and their target is 170 members a month to sign up. And I was like, wow, that's a lot of new members a month. How many are you losing? 50. And I was like, okay, so you're only up 20 and there's 5 of you. I was like, it'd be much easier to just leave.
Yeah.
I was like, they're paying 5 of you to basically be net up 20. That's insane.
That is an outrageous churn.
Yeah.
That is unbelievable. It's fascinating. When I talk to business owners, how many business owners...
And this is not a small business. This is a massive gym group. You have taken quite long sabbaticals in the past. How do you reach that type of freedom and what would you say to others that are thinking the same?
Yeah, so being able to step away from your business, when I talk to business owners about stepping away for a day, right, or a week, many small business owners, the fear shows up in their eyes as they're picturing the dumpster fire they're going to come back to being out of the business for a day or a week, right? And the question is, how do we get you to the point where you can step away for a week or a month or a few months and come back to a business that's the same or better than when you left, right? And that really rolls up to a few things. Like, not only do you need to be able to have the financial ability to do that, meaning you have enough cash flow coming out of the business to you personally that you can afford to travel or do whatever you want for a few months, right? But it also means that the business is not dependent on you such that it can still run without you in it. And that comes down to having the right systems and the right people in place, right? So one of the earlier times I did this is when my wife and I were starting our family. As we started to share the news, I sat down with my team to tell them that we were expecting, we were going to have our first baby in 6 months. And our team was very excited for me about that. I've often hired, people who are smarter and wiser and more experienced than I am in many things. And in this case, most of my team, they were already parents and had families, and I wasn't at that point in my life yet, but they were experienced in these things, right? So the first question to me was, wow, that's amazing, Jeremy. How much time are you taking off? Hadn't really thought about that. And I just figured, I'd be raising a kid and, being there with my wife and my baby and running my business and checking in on things. And they were like, no, you've got to take some time off. And I said, okay, yeah, I'll take some time off. And they said, good, you should take 3 months off from the business. Okay. And my team then said, here are the hires we need and the systems we need and the knowledge you have that we need to get out of your mind and document it somewhere. And we had a 6-month runway to make that happen. And that was a really, we're talking about time boxing. We had a 6-month window to get the missing systems, people, and information figured out. And we did it. And so when my daughter was born, I was able to fully shut off from the business and be 100% present with my wife and my newborn daughter and not worry about a sleepless night and not worry about what time we all got up or, what time we went to the park or the library or whatever it was, and just be fully there as a dad of a newborn. Time I'll never get back in my life again. And I'm so grateful for my team pushing me and laying out a plan for what we needed to do. And I came back, by the way, 3 months later after having not looked at email or text messages or anything, to a business that was better than when I left it. And personally feeling so refreshed and excited and eager to jump in. And I had ideas for the business and things I wanted to do because I had the space for it. And I love business and I love my business and was so excited to jump back in. And it was incredible. My team did a phenomenal job. And when my son was born 2.5 years later, I did the same thing again. So that all came down to systems and people to run those systems and being able to prove out a business model and have that be scalable without us being there at the helm every single day.
And what's the first step to designing that self-sustaining business then? Because it's not easy to take 3 months off.
No. Well, so to get there,
you need a good support network, don't you? In the business.
Huge support network, right? Super early on, for our, our prospective business owners listening or our first time founders, just starting out, look, you got to prove out the product, right? You need to have that messaging figured out, the market. There needs to be a match between those, product market fit, all these things. No, you've got to figure that stuff out first. You don't scale a brand new business that's not proven. Prove out your minimum viable product, get buy-in, have cash flow, have a proven sales funnel where prospects find you and convert to customers that doesn't need you day to day, right? When you've got that part figured out, then it comes down to putting the systems in place that you run yourself, and use your own systems. You then hire for those roles, right? And then incrementally build that out from there, right? Once you've got that, as you call it, that flywheel going, now that's got momentum. Now that can keep going. Right. And then you have the key hires to run that. I had a client I was working with who was in a similar position. He was an earlier stage founder, had a sales pipeline, but he was still doing everything himself. He was doing frontline support and taking care of his customers. The problem is his customers relied on the product working. And if it didn't, they couldn't run their own business. So he had to make sure everything was running all the time. And so when a customer called or emailed, he had to get back to them right away to get things fixed up. This was also a guy who loved the outdoors and loved mountain biking. This was great for his physical health, for his mental health, being out there in nature and away from stuff. But he felt like he couldn't get out and be in the great outdoors because what if a customer needed him and there's no cell phone coverage in the mountains, right? So he was really stuck. He was on that burnout train, not being supported physically, mentally, health, all the rest of it. So we simply had him bring on a virtual support person working business hours, 40 hours a week, right? And that freed him up in so many ways. First of all, he could get back to the outdoors for his physical and mental well-being, right? Secondly, that gave him some space from the business where he could have those big ideas on what to do next. But thirdly, and this was huge, this bought back 40 hours a week that he could use towards sales and closing new accounts. He could work on product development. He could work on innovation, creating systems and hiring. And he was able to then build and scale a business, right? And work on the more important things, knowing someone was taking care of the frontline support, right? And that was something he didn't need to worry about. So we work with business owners on this idea of what can we take you out from doing? What fires can we have you not fight day to day through a system and a hire to free you up to really work on building that business and buying your time back. That's what lets you scale and grow that business to get to exactly that spot.
Amazing. Just as we're coming to the end, Jeremy, what's the one thing you'd want people to take away from this conversation?
Whatever the challenges you're facing in life, whether it's in relationships, parenting, finance, spirituality, business, whatever it is, know that no matter how unique, amazing, and special you are, others are out there on that exact same journey facing what you're facing right now. But more importantly, for generations before you, people have faced similar challenges and gotten through it as well. So you can have that breakthrough. You can get unstuck, right? There is another side to whatever the abyss is that you're facing, and you can get there. But that requires you to fundamentally change and take on new knowledge and new information and hear the wisdom of those who are around you, right? You're not in a vacuum, but you've got to share what that problem is and seek out the help. There are those out there who want to help you and will help you. There are courses and books and coaches and programs that can help you. And if you look at anybody who's scaled or grown in any area, the commonality is they're avid learners. They've stepped out of the comfort zone of what they know and found the knowledge that they don't yet have and grown themselves and stepped into where they want to be.
Amazing. And if listeners are wanting to get in touch with you, where should they head to? How can they reach out?
Yeah. So you can find me over at yourbusinessgrowthplaybook.com. You'll find resources there and a checklist on what you need to do to get unstuck and get back to that exciting growth. You can actually get the introduction to the book for free. Check that out. That goes over, we talked about customer lifetime value, the 3 variables in the formula. We set you up on all that, and everything you need to get back to that growth is at yourbusinessgrowthplaybook.com.
Amazing, Jeremy. Thank you so much for your time. It's been really insightful. I've really enjoyed it. So thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me on. This is great. Love the podcast and the episodes that you've put out there, and that I know the ones you have planning on coming too. Scaling is fun, and let's all get back to that growth.
Yeah, 100%. Good way to end. Thanks very much. If you found yourself nodding along, chances are you've already outgrown hustle and you need a new playbook. You can grab a free sample, an audio walkthrough, and Jeremy's business growth checklist at yourbusinessgrowthplaybook.com, or grab the full book on Amazon or wherever you get your reading fixes. Huge thanks again to Jeremy for joining me, and if you're enjoying Scaling Up Not Giving Up, do take a second to rate and review on Apple Podcasts or share this episode with one founder who needs to hear it. I'm Richard Lee, thanks for listening, see you next time.